Hello, fiber friends. My name is Melissa, and I am the artist behind Wishless World Felted Fiber Arts. And today we're going to talk about pumpkins. The wonderful thing about pumpkins is they're super beginner friendly. Like, if you haven't needle felted before, this might be like close to the perfect project. It introduces you to a lot of different fibers, especially when you start to get textures going on like this. It's very forgiving. Like, if it's lumpy, well, there are lumpy pumpkins. If it's splotchy, I intentionally left a few bald spots on these pumpkins to kind of give them that like painterly drawn effect, right? So these are not perfect pumpkins, and I didn't want them to be. So when you make your own pumpkins, be very kind on yourself, because there's no real wrong way to really do it. I mean, you can even go for other colors, right? Now, this particular video is intended to go alongside a kit that I'm still developing at the moment. Life has been kind of chaotic for me. But if you have your own fibers at home, you can obviously follow all of these steps without having the kit. There's no real measuring or any need for a very particular color. You know, I have a very wide range here. I welcome everybody, even people who have not purchased the kit. But the base kit will be for an orange pumpkin, so that's what we're going to make today. And then at the end of the video, we'll talk about textures and other things, like adding vines or warts. And I think I'll be making an expansion pack that lets you do that. I know I'm doing a class here real soon, which is why I'm trying to rush through this video. And they're going to be able to make 3 pumpkins. So I'll try to give the instructions for all 3. Now, since this is a very beginner-friendly project, I am going to go through like all the little tiny details, like what kind of wools I'm using, the needles I'm using, etc. If you're feeling a little antsy because you already know things like that, all the steps will be marked on the scroll bar or the timeline below. I'm going to timestamp them. So you can just skip to the part that you're most interested in. For example, if you've taken the class with me and that's why you're watching this video and you just want to learn how to use all your fun goodies in the expansion pack, just skip to the chapter called More Texture. All right? So to make this pumpkin, we're going to need wool, of course, right? That's what we needle felt most times, although you can felt rabbit hair and dog hair. Some people use cat. I won't judge. I won't do it myself, but I won't judge. And I've got a couple of different types of wool today. This first off-white sort of veggie filled. There's little sticks and stuff. This is a core wool. And most felters will use this as the inside of a project. It's more cost effective. It's a little bit better for the environment because it's less processed. And another reason why you may want to have core wool to use on the insides is that you won't have to stockpile quite so much of each color. You know, comparatively speaking, we're using a ton of this off-white, and we probably won't even use all of this orange. So it's good for your supplies. Speaking of the orange, I have some fluffy kind of wools that are very similar to the core wool. This is an MC1 blend by livingfelt.com. I'm not affiliated. I just like their wool. And these are nice. It's springy. It's fluffy. I love working with this stuff. It's a little more expensive than the standard. I think a lot of people will use something like this, which is Corindale, and I will use some of this as a top layer, but for making shapes and stuff, I'm not a fan of using that now that I've gotten addicted to my MC1. And then I have 2 accent colors I'll be using on this particular pumpkin. sort of a nice copper brown and a bright orange. These are merino wool, which is some of the finest, nicest wool. This is usually what they'll make scarves and slippers out of because it has a very good skin-to-skin feel. Especially when it's not super felted, it feels soft and enjoyable. Aside from that, you're going to need a felting surface of some sort. If you have the kit, then it's just going to be a foam block like this one. But there's all sorts of options for felting surfaces. When I'm not making a video, I have a large square pillow of wool type thing. It's very dirty right now. I'm not going to pull it out. And I use that. Some people use like a burlap sack full of rice. Anything that just basically prevents you from cramming your needle down onto the surface real hard is going to be good. And then, of course, we're going to need the needles themselves. It would not be needle felting without some needles involved. If you've gotten a kit from me, there'll be 2 needles in there and 2 straight pins. The 2 straight pins, the color of them does not matter, but the color of these needles do matter. The red one is technically a 36 star, and the green one is a 40 twist. But don't worry, you don't have to memorize those numbers. Basically, think of your red one as the more stubborn needle. The red one will push the wool more firmly, and it'll also leave sort of a bigger indent. So sometimes we want that. We want to make big holes or move the wool around, quickly. And then the green needle, the Go needle here, it is easier to push through because it's thinner. But the way it's designed is it doesn't grab a ton of hairs. So it's not going to move the wool very fast, but it'll be easier on your wrists, and it also won't leave a bumpy texture. So for example, if I sit here and I poke this, you can kind of see those little poke marks, but they're not too bad. If I were to grab my red needle and I poke in, you see how obvious that little indent is? That's kind of why we switch back and forth. They each have their own uses. And then finally, if you have the kit, you'll also have 2 rubber bands. We'll go over what we use those for later on because it's just sort of a neat little trick that I don't actually use myself, but I think it'll really help some people. And then for the things that won't be in a kit, but you might have at home, a pair of needle nose pliers. When it comes to our core wool, we're not going to worry about those sticks, but once we get to our top layers, these colored wools, they have less sticks in them, but they still have a few. And picking them out with the pliers means that I kind of get an easy grab on them. But if you don't have the tweezers at home, you can still just pull it out with your fingers. Even someone with short, ugly nails like mine can pull it out. So that's a optional item. And then on this video, I will also be using some handles for my needles. You can buy these at almost any fiber store. If they have needle felting supplies, they probably have these handles available. Some people carry wood ones, some people have the plastic ones. The nice thing about the handles as far as making the video goes is that that tiny little blip of red now becomes a much larger camera-friendly spot of red. So it's easier for you to follow along with what I'm doing. And for personal use, the handles are nice because it gives you something larger to hold on to. I'm able to hold this roughly like a pen, and that helps save my wrist a little bit. If you're only doing this once in a while, you don't have to worry about it, but I needle felt all the time, so I have to watch out for carpal tunnel. If you don't have a handle, all you're going to do is you're going to pinch it here and rest a finger right there, and that's how you'll hold on to your needle. Now let's real quick talk about safety before we get into the actual felting. Safety tip number 1, store your needles when you're not using them. A little test tube. A lot of kits, actually, they'll send the needles kind of poking out of the side like that. That works as well. But don't leave them out. You might get hurt on them. And additionally, they can be broken. You know, if this falls over, you could actually snap your needle. So just put them away when not in use. And when they are in use, always poke down onto a surface. It's going to be very tempting to kind of grab this and poke up here because you want to see it, you know, close to your face, see what you're doing. Resist that urge. You know, even something like this pumpkin is pretty thick at this point. Like if I just throw in the needle like that, it doesn't go all the way through. But what you have to remember is wool does compress. So eventually, boop, there it is. It will come out the other side, especially if you're very intently focusing on your project, you may go all the way through. And then like this, I very rarely hurt myself because I've learned to poke down, but I did manage to nick myself pretty good last night, and that's because I had an adult beverage while I was needle felting, and that's kind of a no-no. So, you know, store your needles, poke down, and finally, when you're poking, you want the direction that you're poking in to be the same direction you're going out. So if I'm poking down, I want to lift up, down, up. If I'm going sideways, I want to match that angle. It gets really tempting to sort of move this up mid-stroke, so to speak, mid-poke. You can snap a needle that way, and it's quite distressing because then you have to try to fish it out of your project, which is no fun. And then you're down a needle. All right, let's get started. We're going to start with our core wool here, and we're just going to sort of break this down into more manageable pieces. I'm probably going to tear it in half, and to do that, I'm just going to kind of grip it and leave, I guess that's roughly 5 or 6 inches of space in between my hands. I'm going to hold down and just pull apart. Those look like good sizes. And then I want to split this lengthwise. And I'm just going to sort of dig my fingers in there, right in the middle. We don't want to start at an end. And pull it apart. I'm going to do the same thing with this one. And then this particular piece is still a bit on the thick side. You can kind of get away with like anywhere from like 1 inch to maybe 2.5 inches. This is a little thick still, so I'm going to just split it again. That's going to be a judgment call that you can make. It won't really hurt anything too much if you've split it really thin or chunky. I mean, there's an ideal level, but it only makes like this much difference. And now we're going to take one of our strands, and we're basically going to tie a knot in it, you know, right in the center if we can. So to do that, I'm going to kind of wrap it around my 2 fingers here, and then I'm going to slide it forward and kind of just push that wool right through like that and pull. We don't want to pull super hard because as you saw earlier, we can rip it, but just about there. You have a knot and 2 little tails. What that knot is going to do for us is kind of give us a solid base to work from and make it so that our needle has something to really catch on to and felt into. Without that knot, it'd take a little bit longer, but it oddly helps a lot. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take one of the tails and we're just going to kind of wrap it around like so. And then I'm going to take my other tail and kind of wrap it in a perpendicular or a cross direction there. Just like so. And then I'm going to grab one of my needles, which one doesn't quite matter, and I'm going to give it a few little pokes to sort of tack that down. So this is not felted per se, but we have kind of tacked down the ends. It's not going to unravel on us. So go ahead and make your own little ball, and I will see you in just a minute, okay? Welcome back. You should have your little ball now, and all we're going to do is build up the bulk of our pumpkin. So I'm going to grab another strand that we pre-slimmed down, right? And I'm going to wrap it around. And after I wrap it maybe, I don't know, 1, 2 times, I'm going to kind of pull on this a little bit and just kind of force it to go at a diagonal direction so that we make a round shape instead of a cylinder. Got to the end there, and I'm going to tack it down. And I'm going to repeat this step until I get the size that I want. You may not need to use all your wool if you have one of the kits. In fact, you could save some and make like super tiny miniature pumpkins later on if you wanted to. And I'm going to build this up maybe this way. Now that I'm getting close to the end of the size I want, now I have to think about the shape. Do I want a really good sphere, you know, a nice ball? Or do I want to make a pumpkin that's, you know, maybe, let's see here. Here's one that's a bit fat. And this one's a bit more on the skinny side. So I think I've made probably an even mix of fat and skinny. So I'm going to do another fat one. They're more stable. They don't tip over as much. And I don't think I'm going to quite use all of this. This is pretty close to the size I want. So I'm going to split this piece down and just go around the equator here to sort of emphasize the fatness of the pumpkin. And tack it down. Once you have the rough shape that you want, we're going to go through and we're going to lightly felt this. Mostly what I'm looking for is like right here, this is just a fluffy, frizzy, loose bit. I'm going to tack that down, and I'm not going crazy. I don't want to make this rock hard. If you felt for a long time, it will get stiffer and stiffer. We're not doing that just yet. We're just sort of evening out the thicknesses, finding any place that's really fluffy still, and poke it down. This step should probably take you about 5 minutes to do. So we'll head into a pause break. Go ahead and wrap your ball and then poke it until it feels mostly consistent. Don't worry about the ridges yet. We're not going to do any indents quite yet. Just nice smooth ball for now. See you in just a minute. Welcome back, fiber friends. You should at this point have a sphere of some sort. Maybe it's a little oblong or maybe it's a little fat. And all of my really fluffy flyaway parts have been tacked down. So we're going to add our color. We're going to start with this nice creamsicle orange here. Right now, it's pretty thick. In order to get sort of these nice little bald spots, basically, these intentional see-through parts, we're going to need to thin it down a little bit. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to try to actually split it in half, sort of like you would with a paper towel. Have you ever like taken a paper towel and took the 2-ply down to 1-ply? We're going to try to do that same thing. So I'm going to grip it right here with my thumbs, and I'm just going to kind of pull apart and work it like so. And voila, we have a much thinner piece that you can almost see my hand through in a few spots. Doesn't have any super big holes, but even if it did, that'd be fine. It does have a stick in it, so let's see here. We don't want that stick. Burp. Voila. And now we're going to add this to our pumpkin. I'm just going to lay it on any old way. It doesn't quite matter. And then I'm going to tack it down. And remember, for this style, I'm not trying to get 100% coverage. So this little bald spot right here is exactly what I'm looking for. So go ahead and take all of your little pieces and basically cover it until the point where, like on this one, you have color just about everywhere, but you see through it. And we're going to cover, and then you're also going to want to poke down all those little flyaway pieces like we did with the white layer. We're still not worrying about those creases yet. We're only doing a smooth pumpkin for right now. So we're headed to another pause point. I'll see you right after the break. Welcome back, fiber artist. You should now have a vaguely orange colored pumpkin shaped thing. This definitely doesn't read as pumpkin yet though, right? We're gonna finally work on those ridges. To make those ridges, we're gonna felt in some lines. We're gonna really start moving the wool around now. And we're gonna do one set of lines that are basically a plus sign, cross shape, what have you. And then after we've done those, we're gonna break those sections down with an X shape. So there'll be 8 segments all together in our pumpkin. Now, when I make my lines, I actually just go for it. I just start at the tip and I start walking my needle all the way down. And I can even work with this thicker needle to move the wool a bit faster. But essentially, I'm just going to walk the line down. And really, I think it gives a nice, fun, whimsical feel because it's not going to be perfect. You know, like there's been times where I've missed the center completely, which is okay because we're going to basically hide the center with a stem anyways, right? And I'm just going to finish this line. Voila. I'll probably go back through and deepen that, but you get the idea. You can just go around. Now, before you panic, I know some people love their straight lines. They love to have direction. They feel like if they can't draw a straight line, how could they felt one? And you know what? If you're the type of person who needs a little more control, that is why we have rubber bands. So, with the rubber band, what you would do is you're going to find your cross shape or your X shape or your plus sign shape, whatever shape it feels like at the moment. And basically, these are now little guide wires here. So I can basically do the same thing, but now I have something to follow. I'm going to have to go a little slower because I don't want to poke the rubber band and snap it, right? And I'm also being a lot more deliberate with my holes. Like before, I was being kind of quick and just moving across. I'm being very deliberate. I'm actually pushing the needle all the way through the pumpkin. The reason I'm doing that is I don't want to spend all the time with the rubber band there. I'm basically kind of just going around and making a, how would you put it? A dot to dot, a connect the dot. That's what I'm thinking of. A connect the dot kind of a line. So that's why I'm going slow. I'm going very deep so that I can see those holes once I've removed my rubber band. We're almost back at the top here. Maybe. And there we go. And once I have basically an outline of where I want my line to go, I can remove the rubber bands and work a bit faster by just poking and following my outline, right? So I'm going to keep poking that down until it gets nice and deep. And then I'm going to crisscross, so we have this shape going on right now. If I'm using my rubber bands or I'm just doing it otherwise, I'm also going to do this shape, right? So we're going to end up with 8 segments. So this is where I leave you with the pause screen and let you kind of make your magic happen. I'll see you after you have all 8 segments sort of felted out. All right, I have made my 8 lines and hopefully you have too, because we're ready to move on to the next step, which is a very small step, but it'll make a big difference on your final pumpkin. Right now, the intersection where all those lines are, it's very crisp, right? That's our natural instinct, is try to make symmetry or make it very obvious. But when you look at a pumpkin, it actually kind of like on the butt end, it has a bit of a divot in it, right? And where we put the stem also needs to have a divot. So we're going to want to open up this middle and kind of push it down and out. To do that, I'm going to kind of follow along, and then when I get close to the point, I'm actually going to start taking a shortcut, in essence, to the next line. And I'm just rounding out all those little sections. So instead of being perfect little, orange slices, we're going to open up the center. And you see, it doesn't take a whole lot to do that. It might take a little bit of time, but it's not too bad. Just like so. So take a moment to open up that center. You're going to want to do it to both ends of your pumpkin, both the top and the bottom. You're going to want to kind of open up and, you know, just make a little divot. There's no other way to say it. So go ahead and do that, and I'll see you in just a few moments. All right, now that I've pushed in both my top and my bottom, I'm not sure which one's the top and which one's the bottom. It doesn't quite matter with pumpkins, honestly. Usually the fatty part is on the bottom, but it's not necessary. But what we're going to do next is we're going to kind of define these ridges even more. Like pushing the wool in gives you that sense that there's ridges there, but it really helps if there's something kind of more contrasty going on in there. And that's where this sort of copper brown color is going to come into play. So I'm going to pull that out of my bag. It's pretty frizzy, goodness gracious. And right now, you wouldn't know it if you're not familiar with fiber, but this is a pretty chonky piece for what we want to do. And forgive me for saying chonky. That's one of the YouTubers I watch says chonky all the time instead of chunky, and it's just, it's stuck. It is part of my vocabulary now, chonky. But anyways, so I really want to thin this down. I can thin it down at least once by splitting it lengthwise, just like we did with our core wool before. And I might be able to get away with doing that again, but the more times you do it, the harder it gets to do. So what we're going to do instead is, now that it's mostly thin, we're going to take a step that's called drafting. If you're familiar with spinning at all, this is the same idea. We're going to take the fibers and we're just going to stretch them out. I have my hand about roughly 3 inches away, maybe 4 inches away, and I'm just going to lightly tug. And that pulls some of the fiber out. I'm going to walk my hand down and lightly tug again. Walk my hand down and lightly tug. And it's barely any effort at all. I'm not putting a lot of force on here. But you can see, here's the strand we stripped off at the same time. If you compare them, this other strand that I drafted is about twice as long. I'm going to go ahead and draft out this other one, show you again. I'm going to pinch at the end and lightly hold this and just pull. There we go. Walk my hand down and pull again. We want to try to keep this as even as we can. If it tears apart or it has like a thick part, we can work with that too. It's not the end of the world, but if you can, even is good. All right. So go ahead and draft out your fiber. I know there's going to be like a million pause breaks, but I think that's good for work along videos, right? Draft your fiber, and then we'll talk about the next step in just a moment. Welcome back yet again. So with our drafted fiber, we're just going to basically follow those creases. This stuff bunches up real quick, so I would definitely recommend using your green needle for this particular step. This step, it kind of matters, but we're just going to tuck that in, and we're going to kind of just pull it slightly to realign it, poke down a little bit, pull it again just to straighten it back out, and poke it down in there. And when I reach the top, I don't want like really heavy crisscrosses, so I'm actually going to tear this. I'm going to put my thumb down, kind of grip it right about there, and tear. And it kind of just thins it out extra right there so that we don't have too much brown going over our center. And then I pick the line back up on the other end of the center with our nice thin bit. And this will just, alternating between thin and thick bits will add to that whole painted on feeling that this is maybe more of an illustration of a pumpkin than a pumpkin. it adds a lot of character. It's good to alternate between thick and thin here. I'm going to tear that across and poke it right on down. And I'm going to repeat that with all 8 lines. So here's our next pause point. I'll see you in just a moment. Okay, now that we have those lines in, we are going to add our next accent color. This is another merino wool, which is that soft, super fine stuff. But you can use any sort of top coat. You could use more of the MC1, you can use Corandel, but for this particular kit, I've got merino in there. And this time around, we're not going to split it in half. Instead, we're going to try to pull off sort of like little wispy bits. So I'm going to hold this right here, and I'm going to grab the end and just tug like that. Just tiny little wispy bits. If you find that you're not really able to tug, you're probably too close to the end. So back off a little bit and try again. Now, if you're all the way down to here, you're going to get like big pieces, which you could then make into smaller and smaller pieces. So there's no real wrong way to do this. But anyways, we're going to take one of our little wisps and we're going to kind of line it up in one of the segments and poke it down. You kind of see how it's making sort of a streaky effect. That's sort of what merino wool does when it's very, very thin. If you put on a thicker coat, you can kind of make it look a little more consistent, but that's not really my goal. I am using the green needle though, because with the red needle, you can see it kind of almost overstimulates those fibers. And I'm gonna add more to this segment, I think, starting from this end. And when it's right here at the corner, I'm kind of like lifting up some of the loose fibers and pushing them back into the corner. And that's going to help define each segment as a separate little thing. Just like so. So when I'm doing this, I'm going to alternate between, some really thick lay-ons, some really thin lay-ons, and some medium lay-ons. You're going to want to avoid doing the whole like every other, because then it's a bit circus tenty. But like on this pumpkin, I'm really thick right here, none almost here, kind of medium, almost none, light. So I've just kind of randomized how much of that brighter accent wool that I've used. But I'm just going to keep adding little wisps and layers until I like how this looks. And you should therefore do the same. I'll see you here after the next pause break. All right, I have added on my brighter orange accent color, and you can see all the segments look a little bit different. And that's kind of the effect I'm going for. You could, skip the orange and go heavier on the lighter orange and get an effect like this. It's a little more subdued, but I'm kind of enjoying the little pops and differences in this. So anyways, we're gonna work on our stem next. To do that, I'm gonna grab a little bit of green and I'm gonna take a piece off and reserve it for later. It doesn't quite matter where you tear it from. And then with the leftovers, or the main piece rather, I'm going to just roll this up. So I've made sort of a cylinder, and we're going to tack that down. And then choose one of the ends, whichever end seems thicker if there is a thick one. I think these are both about the same, so I don't have a thick end this time around. But choose one end to be the top. Whichever end you choose to be the top, we're going to start working on pushing some of those fibers back into it this way. And then we're gonna rotate around, kind of go along the whole tube a little bit. This is still very soft and springy at the moment, so we want to get that condensed down. And you'll notice I'm not poking a lot on this opposite end. The part that's going to stick into the pumpkin, we want to be a bit soft and wispy. It'll connect with the pumpkin better if it's like that. So after I've kind of firmed this up a little bit more, I'm going to go ahead and tap in the top again. And this could be tricky. You can hurt yourself. This is the one step where you're most likely to poke yourself with the needle trying to get that top to be flat. So what you can do is you can take your straight pins and just use those to hold it down and work from the top. You don't have to. You know, if you trust yourself around your own fingers, you don't need the straight pins. They only do a medium good job anyways. But it is an option. And I'm going to keep kind of going from the top and then around the cylinder until it feels about as firm as our pumpkin is. We want everything to be close to the same level of firmness. To really get that top a little flattened out, we can also put the top down and poke this way too. And what that's going to do is it's going to kind of help taper our stem a little bit. We want the top of our stem to be thicker. When you cut a pumpkin off the vine, usually where it connects is the thin part, and then it kind of bevels out a little bit. So that's kind of what we're going for, is just a little bit of a curve in there. Not a lot. And you know, if you don't have a curve, if it's like a very straight stem, that actually works too. There are so many types of pumpkins in the world. You could convincingly do, you could probably do just about any type of stem, and there's gonna be a real life counterpart to it. So voila, I have a slightly tapered, it's kind of like a nail, maybe a bit. But yeah, triangle shape cylinder here. Conical shape. That's a better word. So go ahead and poke your stem until it's like this, where one end is firm and kind of flat. The other end is a little thinner, but it's still very loose and wispy. Very fluffy end. Pause here and I'll see you in just a moment. Welcome back. Now it's time to attach our stem. You're going to want to figure out which is your top. There's no wrong or right answer. I kind of like the way this center looks, so I'm going to leave that as the bottom, since I'm going to cover this other center up with my stem. And we're going to find out where we want it and just kind of pin it down, again, to keep our fingers out of the way. And I'm going to stick this down. I might start with my green needle just to get the first couple of pokes here, especially because like the green needle is so slender, it'll kind of go around my straight pins. But once I get a couple of pokes in, which I think I'm right about there, I'm going to want to take out my straight pins because they will get in the way of the needle a little bit. So it's on there well enough that I don't need them. And I'm going to go ahead and switch to my red needle. This is going to really make a strong connection. We're going to push that fiber way into our pumpkin. Because what happens when these are on display, people love to pick it up by the stem. It's a natural sensation to do. So we want this piece to be very well connected. So we're going to use our red needle and really dig in. You notice I'm kind of lifting up and I'm rotating it around so that those needle strikes are coming from all directions. Just like so. And then once you're pretty sure that's firmly in there, an optional thing, and you don't have to do this, this is a perfectly good stem as is, but you'll notice on like this pumpkin, it has a little bit of bleed through. This kind of gives a more organic feel, I think. And that's where this extra bit that we saved comes into play. Because I can just pull out a tiny, tiny bit. And I'm going to start kind of in the crevice here and push it in. And then as I get closer to the stem, I'm going to start pulling those fibers back out of the crevice. So it opens up into a bit of an arrow shape. And I'm not going to do this 100% even on all of them. It'll look a little too much like a star at that point, but just a couple of wispy bits here and there will just sort of add that extra layer. Just like so. I think one more, maybe two more. Right here. And right here, I think. So, that's how you're going to make your stem. And we are going to head into a pause point. If you only have the base kit or you don't have any other fun fibers, this is as far as we're really going to get. So you can work on your pumpkin and turn off the video and relax. If you want to learn how to do some more fiber things, stay tuned after the pause break. But work on that stem, okay? All right, so with that, we have completed our basic pumpkin. If you just have the starter set, the basic pumpkin, I don't know what I'm going to call it yet because I haven't officially made the basic pack. But if you have that, this is what you're going to get out of it, more or less. There's nothing else to do. But if you have your own fiber at home, or if you have one of the expansion packs that I'm building for these, then we have a few more options. Now, first up is the curls. So pumpkins like this one and this one, they have a little vine looking thing added to them. Those are curls. And your expansion pack is going to have two kinds of curls. Now, colors will vary by expansion pack, but you will essentially have three-ish kinds of curl. There'll be a very white, shiny one. This is another type of sheep. This is a Lancaster sheep. They also have a curly coat. And this is just the natural sheep's curl. No chemicals or heat or dyes. This is just shorn off a sheep, and there it is. The ones that I'm including in this pack are very soft, and that's because they're first shear. So these are from little baby sheep. These are not full adult sheep, so they're softer and just more enjoyable all around. So there's white curls. There's these really frizzy ones, and this definitely colors will vary by pack. But these are hand-dyed sheep's curl. And I don't know the breed of sheep for this one in particular, but you can see that the hand dyeing process adds a bit of frizz that's just kind of unavoidable. Sometimes it'll be a less than this. This is a particularly frizzy batch, but it still can be a nice texture. You can even take these really frizzy bits and use them to, here, let me pull some off, to like add even another layer of color. In fact, I think I am going to do that. A nice little layer of color to this pumpkin. And with these, when you want to attach them to the stem as like a vine, you're going to just put that up there. You're going to poke it in. You're probably going to want to get your red needle and really poke. And then if you leave them loose like this, it will be a weak point in your pumpkin. If you're going to put this away, year after year, this is going to start to have flyaways. It could get pulled out easily if a youngster grabs it. So you're probably, even though it's not as nice looking, you're probably going to want to tack it down to your pumpkin. So I've got this strongly there. And then with this, I'm going to kind of take some of the little low parts, like this part would hit the pumpkin, and I'm going to tack that down. I'm going to find another low part, like a twist in the curl, and tack that down. I'm not tacking it down all along the length because that would flatten out the curl. I'm just kind of picking a few little areas. And that just gives us a nice little bit of texture. Like so. Now, on top of the natural sheep's curl, your expansion pack will also have a piece of artificial sheep's curl. It's not artificial, but do you see how it's kind of a corkscrew shape? It's more springy. It's a little more clean looking. This is some regular merino wool. In fact, it was the same kind that we used to insert our little pumpkin bits. But I took a long strand of it and I wrapped it around a wooden skewer and I poured boiling hot water over it and shook off the extra water and let it dry. And that's basically a heat set curl. And I think these look a lot more viney than some of the other curls. And let's see here. Let's get a smaller one. Your kit's only going to have like little pieces. And with these, not that one, this one. I like that one better. And with these, you're going to do basically the same thing. You're going to want to set it up there. But that corkscrew gives you a very obvious place to sort of tack this down in. Everywhere the corkscrew is downward, that's where I'm going to tack it in. And that helps maintain the shape of that little curly Q. I might pull this. You can kind of decide where it goes, like if it wraps around or if it goes back down. It probably goes up and then down like that. And voila, we've got a little bit of a vine going on right there on our pumpkin. That's a bit of visual interest. The first couple of pumpkins I did, I always added curls. And then as I've been doing more pumpkins, I've gotten to the point where I enjoy the simplicity of no curl. But you have them in your kit, and that is an option. Now, the other thing you'll notice in your kit are these. These are wool neps. They're actually a byproduct of producing wool. Basically, little tiny short fibers get pushed out to the edges of the machine and they rub against themselves and they felt themselves into those little shapes. And what I always think is funny about wool neps is that by weight, they're actually more expensive than anything else I'm putting in the kit by weight. But they're technically a waste product. It's hard to be eco-friendly, I guess. And those are mainly for the green, there it is, the green and yellow pumpkin to add some warts. Now, this pumpkin, if you were to try to just needle felt those on, like I'm going to set that right there, and I'm going to stab it, it's not going anywhere. In fact, I managed to get a twofer. These won't really felt in. And the reason for that is that they are already very well felted themselves. They don't have a lot more give left to them. So if I want to attach these to my pumpkin, I could probably cheat and glue them down. But most fiber artists try to make every solution be about fiber. So we are going to use fiber. I have this minty green stuff that'll be in your kits, or at least the kits if you have the yellow and white combo. I may eventually do more color combos. I haven't decided yet. And this is very similar to the merino in that it's hairy instead of, fluffy. But it does have more bounce to it than the merino. It's a little coarser. This is Corondale wool, and it is actually the most common needle felting wool I think you'll find in other kits. Most kits that I've run into do not use the MC one. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. What we're going to do is we're going to grab a little bit of the fluff, okay? And let's see here. Here's the newly wanted warts here, and I see a loose piece, so I'm going to add that there too. maybe. And we're going to create a net, essentially. This might be too much. Let's thin that out just a little. I'm going to start at the top and kind of pull it down. And I'm not going to go anywhere near those bumps yet. We're going to leave those wool neps alone until I get this little bit of accent color all tucked in there. Make sure to go end to end. So this is a little net. It's kind of just holding those in. But they look a little floaty. So now that I've got this all kind of tacked down and pushed in, I'm going to now go in between the neps and kind of add a bit more definition back into that section. And just a couple of little pokes. Be careful not to poke through the nep. And voila! That looks like little warts on our pumpkin. And it more or less is going to stay there. I mean, if you rub a lot, you could rub them out of their little nets. But that's typically how you attach those when you're doing a needle felting project. And with that, there's not much more to say than to explain maybe how to get some different color combinations. With my white pumpkin, I did not add a dark color to the creases. Now, sometimes it looks darker in there because the gray that I put on over my core kind of seeped into those creases. But I did not specifically add like a really dark merino or corundel or anything like that. And then on top is a nice white. And that's a very nice, simple sort of looking pumpkin, but it's really pretty. Now, another option you might have if you have a stash of a lot of colors at home, and maybe one day this will be a different expansion pack, but if you have lots of merino, we can make a pumpkin like this one. Instead of having a base made out of the MC1, like this creamsicle color was our MC1, and then we added the brighter color on top, right? Instead of doing that, for this one, I have no base color at all. Instead, I took whatever colors I felt like. You know, here's some yellowish white, some light pink, and some like salmon. And I pulled off some, and then I kind of tore them and stacked them. Tore and stacked. And you do that enough time, you create sort of your own custom blend that you can now add on to the pumpkin. And when you do this, I try to get like every segment to look like a different sort of pattern combo. Like some have green in them and some have yellow, and this one has a lot of pinky colors. And it just adds a very fun, like, I don't know, crayon drawing kind of a look. It's very streaky, but it's also kind of endearing in an arty sort of a way, right? So that's how we would do that kind of pumpkin. And with that, you basically have the tools to make infinite number of pumpkins. You know, you might find out that you like really plain ones. Like this one doesn't even have an accent color over top. It just has the white, the core, and some dark green in the crevice. This one has no crevices. You know, the options are infinite, really, based on your fiber supply. With that, I have to say thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you were able to make a pumpkin, and I will hopefully make another video before the year ends. Bye-bye for now.